Madam, Sir, dear guests, greetings. My name is France Annie Erol, a proud ICJ ambassador in Haiti. It is February 24th, 2022 on Black History Month and the day after the birthday of the Honorable W.E.B. Du Bois, for whom today's event is organized is in his honor. We thank you for joining us for this great day of reflection of Black Internationalism Day, organized by Interconnected Justice. We welcome you and hope that we will enjoy some quality time together in the spirit of Marcus Garvey thought. We are going to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery because whilst others might be free the body, none but ourselves can free the mind. Interconnected Justice is an organization that is involved in this, promoting Black excellence, being a global platform, connecting people of African descent for collaborative actions in the areas of policy and advocacy, media and culture, collaboration in education for Pan-Africanism, ecosystem of advocacy and communal self-actualization. We will have today with us various eminent and powerful personalities that you will appreciate and learn from. Now, I have the honor to announce a world heritage, the first and so far, the only woman president of the first Black Republic, Haiti. She has made an impact into judicial system, the political system for having organized credible elections and with honesty. The annals of history testifies it. She is a working dictionary that has influenced the world of writing. She has to her account several books and several volumes of encyclopedia written in about 60 years. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the former judge of the Court of Cassation in Haiti, former President Ertha Pascal Trouillot.
Que la paix et la grâce de Dieu demeurent avec nous tous. En cette période décrétée par le Parlement
in this period, declared by Parliament in 1995 as Black History Month, and unanimously adopted thanks to the action of the Honorable Jean Augustine, Black Canadian social activist and teacher, the first woman elected to the House of Commons and defender of civil, ethnic minorities, and women's rights. I am delighted to be among you on this podium of memory, wonderfully initiated by our brother, Bishop Joseph W. Tolton, an exceptional and intelligent man for having conceived and dared to achieve what I would humbly call this historic summit of Blackness, or according to the polite convenience of the salons, the summit of fortunate celebrities brought to the accomplishment of a noble task in their limitations, weakness, stress, and success. So be congratulated, dear colleagues. We dine at the same table and are exposed to the same appetite.
Dans leur faiblesse et le stress et le succès. Soyez-en donc complimentés, félicités, chers confrères. Nous dînons à la même table et exposés à la même digestion.
I pay a well-deserved tribute to all of the team for their assiduous work and for how faithful to this appointment of the spirit, the heart, and the love they are. let us not forget
car c'est
that this is
aussi
also
le
the
mois
month
de
of love.
l'amour.
I
Je
greet
vous
you
salue
all
tous
and thank
et
you for your
applaudis
attendance.
votre saine assistance.
In one of the exceptional
À l'une des
circumstances
circonstances
of my life,
exceptionnelles de ma vie,
I thought
j'ai
there are
pensé tout bas,
circumstances sometimes
il est des
stimulated
circonstances
by the
parfois frôlées par les
caresses of
caresses du
destiny.
destin.
I have
Telle
experiences
fut en
in
effet
this
la
life.
mienne,
It was
mais
also the
aussi
same for those
celle
men
de
and
tous
women
ceux-là,
endowed
hommes
by
et
the nature
femmes,
with
dotés par la
particular gifts and
nature de
progress,
dons et progrès particuliers, admirables, enviables.
admirable and
Un auteur
enviable
du
even.
XVIIe siècle,
A 17th century
Jean-Baptiste
author,
Poquelin, appelé Molière,
Jean-Baptiste
disait:
Poquelin,
il n'est
known
pas
as
vrai
Molière,
peut-être,
said,
et pour beaucoup de
"It's not
causes,
very
qu'une
honest,
femme
and for many reasons,
étudie et
that a
sache tant
woman
de
should
choses,
study and know so
former aux
many
bonnes
things,
mœurs
to
de ses
educate her
enfants,
children with good
faire
values,
aller le
to manage the
ménage,
household,
avoir l'œil
to
sur ses
take care
gens,
of her
et
people, and
régler la
monitor
dépense
expenses
avec
in the house
économie doit être
must
son
be her
étude
study
et
and
sa
her philosophy.
philosophie.
All the power is with the sex
Mais
that wears the beard."
il disait encore que du côté de la barbe est la toute-puissance.
But in the 20th century, minds
Mais
have
le XXe
changed
siècle
globally.
a apporté du
The
renouveau
International Labor
sur l'échiquier
Organization, in a
mondial.
communication signed in
L'Organisation
Philadelphia
internationale du
on
travail,
June 17,
pour forger des
1964,
civilisations
to
et
forge
établir l'égalité
civilizations and
dans une
establish equality, points
communication
out that all
signée à
human beings,
Philadelphie
regardless
le
of
17
race,
juin
creed, or
1964,
sex, have the
fait
right to
remarquer
pursue
que
their material
tous les
progress
êtres
and
humains,
spiritual development in
quelle que
freedom
soit leur
and dignity,
race, leur
with economic
croyance ou leur
dignity and
secte,
social
ont
opportunity.
le droit de poursuivre leur progrès matériel et leur développement spirituel dans la liberté et la dignité, dans la dignité économique et avec des chances égales.
Like the traditional
À
production
l'instar des
entities,
entités
Black
traditionnelles
women of
productives,
all social
les
and
femmes
professional
noires de
categories
toute
have
catégorie
invaded the
sociale et
international
professionnelle,
space.
professionnels de tout genre, ont envahi l'espace international. Tenace, la femme noire en impose par sa capacité, sa force de
Tenacious, the
frappe,
Black woman
son
imposes herself
intelligence,
by her
son
capacity,
ardeur,
her
sa
strength, her
sagesse dans
intelligence, which
l'accomplissement de ses
brings this
idéaux de
ancient
grandeur.
philosopher to this famous
Ce qui
reflection.
porte ce philosophe
Work
antique
is
à
the
cette
food of
réflexion
noble
célèbre.
souls,
Le
especially when it is
travail
done with
est
passion,
l'aliment des âmes
dedication,
nobles.
sincerity, and honesty.
Surtout réalisé avec passion, dévouement, sincérité, honnêteté. Ce ne sont pas de vains mots, comme le conçoit le cœur cupide, mais une réalité croissante, une réalité impérieuse et véritable en des temps
These
difficiles.
are not vain
La
words,
facilité
as
du
the greedy
pouvoir,
heart
la
concedes, but a
facilité
steady
de saisir
reality,
la monnaie, du pouvoir, de
imperative
la
and
monnaie,
true in difficult
décide
times,
de prendre
when
le
the ease
pas
of
sur le
power
savoir,
and
sur
money
l'effort, sur
decide
le
to
sens
take
de la
over
valeur et la
knowledge,
pratique
effort,
des
values,
vertus
and
cardinales.
cardinal virtues.
La coexistence forcée des catégories d'êtres sur cette planète qui serait inégalement
The
classée
forced
pour des raisons
coexistence of the
d'ordre
categories of
philosophique,
beings on this
psychologique,
planet
social,
that would
économique et
be
traditionnel
unequally
est
classified for
heurtée,
reasons of
écartée, donc
psychological,
en désuétude.
physiological, social,
L'ouverture du
economic, and
savoir
traditional
enfanta
order
une
is
panoplie de
cullied,
grandes figures
discarded,
historiques noires,
fallen, and wormed.
considérées
The
également
opening of
comme des fruits
knowledge
de la
gave birth
libération
to a
et de la
panoply of
résistance,
great Black historical
bénéficiaires aussi et
figures,
surtout
considered
de la
also as
grâce
the
du
fruits of
Très-Haut,
liberation
de
and
pouvoir
resistance,
y accéder sans
beneficiaries
discrimination
also and
aucune
above all of
aux
the grace
échelles
of the
des
mighty
valeurs
God who were
sociales,
able to access
civiques,
without
scientifiques,
ostentation to the
intellectuelles,
scales of
sportives,
social, civic,
artistiques,
scientific,
littéraires,
intellectual, sports,
médicales,
artistic,
spirituelles,
literary, medical,
abolitionnistes et
spiritual,
présidentielles.
abolitionist, and presidential
Citons
values.
quelques-uns
Let us
de
quote
ces
some of
illustrations
these
de
illustrious
ces illustres
characters.
personnages. Les Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, Sidney Poitier, Malcolm X, Harry Belafonte, Declarence John, Léopold Sédar Senghor, Sankara, Tina Kainer, Nat King Cole, Carrie Bess et son
And
fils
her
assis
son,
sur
who
des
sat
sièges
at the
réservés
same
aux blancs,
seats reserved for the whites,
Cal au
Cal at the Roseland
théâtre
Theater
à
in
Lyon
Glasgow,
Glaston, Frank Sinatra, Louis Armstrong, Miriam Makeba, Maria Anderson, Sheila Anderson. La liste est longue. Otis Redding, Jean-Augustine Collins, McConnell, première noire élue à la Chambre et nommée au cabinet fédéral, et
the
première
first Black
commissaire
elected to Congress
à l'enquête
and
du
appointed to
gouvernement
the
de
federal
Trouillot.
cabinet and the first commissionary in the Ontario government. Althea Gibson, tennis player in 1956, more than 40 years before the Williams sisters. Venus and Cerilia, Amelia Boynton Robinson, Black American civil rights activist in 1964, who in Alabama organized the Selma marches to protest the assassination of a young Black activist, Jimmy Lee Jackson, and who will obtain in 1990 the Martin Luther King Medal.
Nina Simone, Angela Davis, Dr. Mark Carol Jamison, ingénieur médecin et astronaute afro-américaine, voyagea dans l'espace.
An African-American medical engineer and astronaut who traveled to space aboard the Endeavour in 1992. First Black woman billionaire in the 1970s.
Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, boxer.
A stadium in Haiti is named after a high-profile athlete who won an Olympic medal born in Cabalon, specialist in long jump in 1932. He won the gold medal in Los Angeles. I am referring to the Silvio Almeida Stadium.
Médaille d'or à Los Angeles. Il s'agit de Silvio Almeida. Citons Kamala Harris.
Let's mention Kamala Harris, first woman vice president of the United States, Ertha Pascal Trouillot, seventh woman president of the world and first bank woman president and head of government in Haiti, who organized the first free, honest, and democratic elections in her country. First woman judge of the Supreme Court and at all levels of jurisdiction, writer and encyclopedist.
Elle a écrit une encyclopédie pour la jeunesse haïtienne de 4 volumes, de 4 tomes. Daniela Ferrière,
Black Haitian who is accompanying a seat in the French Academy.
40 immortels à l'Académie française. Edwige Dantica, Emeline Michel, Ray Charles, Eddie Murphy, Sammy Davis Jr., Joséphine Becker, américaine, artiste à 13 ans, naturalisée française, élue des funérailles militaires et nationales.
American artist at 13 years old who naturalized French had a military and national funeral, currently resting in the Pantheon of Paris, to name a few.
Les Noirs ont brillé partout dans le monde et dans tous les domaines.
I have somewhat painted the almost complete picture of the iconic faces of Black excellency around the world in a kaleidoscopic mix of men and women. I strongly think that the evolution of the world cannot be conceived without the contribution of men and women, because the evolution of women is the evolution of a whole people. The tireless efforts of the Titans, their workspaces, their unsatisfied and worried looks, their appetite for knowledge are still looking for useful actions that can be signs of change and of humanitarian welfare. This is the vocation of the elites of providential fate. They can neither be proud of it nor set limitations on it. It is only to be remembered that in this present time, it is built on the measure of men and women who dare to dream boldly and to work hard to transform their dreams into reality. Blacks are indispensable and irrevocable actors. This is also their ideal of greatness and wisdom.
En sont des acteurs indispensables et irrévocables. C'est là aussi leur idéal de grandeur et de sagesse. Merci de m'avoir écouté. Que Dieu nous bénisse tous.
Sorry, Bishop, you're speaking on mute.
Thank you so kindly. And welcome again. Thank you, Annie France Herald, our ICJ ambassador from Haiti, for such a gracious welcome. What an incredible honor it is that we have been saluted and acknowledged and seen by President Ertha Pascal Trouillot, the first female president of Haiti, who so importantly was the first president of Haiti to preside over free and fair elections, as Annie noted. I welcome each of you again to this incredibly auspicious occasion. First, let me thank you again, our guests, for being here with us today. I want to acknowledge the presence of our ICJ strategic partners in Brazil. CEN is one of the major forces of Afro-Brazilian liberation and resistance, and they are in the house today, and I'm so excited to have them. I want to honor the presence of the Honorable Miriam Mitembe of Uganda, who is a mother to interconnected justice. I want to honor Baina Bello, who's one of the leading historians and thinkers on the island of Haiti. It is an incredible honor to be graced by your presence on today. To the Interconnected Justice Board of Directors, Reverend Derek McQueen, our chair, and all of the board members that are here today. To the Interconnected Justice staff, to the 24 Interconnected Justice ambassadors who are from Uganda, Rwanda, Kenya, Congo, the United States, Haiti, Brazil, and Colombia. I thank you so much because you are the heartbeat of interconnected justice. To the strategic associates, Max Jean-Louis and John Slay-Pierre, who have also been, Max Jean-Louis, a lead project manager, and John Slay supporting that work as it relates to the design and production of our event today. Thank you. To the ICJ Music Beat out of Haiti and Congo, I appreciate you. To FYID and Imani Jones, our creative director, thank you. To Lamont Gwen, who is our producer, I thank you. And I want to acknowledge the presence of many of our young people in Uganda who are a part of the Bobby Wine movement. I am super excited to have you here today. And I want to thank our ICJ ambassador from Uganda, Hazel Were, for the work that she and Simon Mpinga have done in communicating directly with the Honorable Bobby Wine and his wife. I'm deeply grateful for that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So excited that we are here together as a family. Let's just give big ups for being together as a family and celebrate ourselves this morning for being a family and for being connected. According to Judeo-Christian mythology, the divine created humankind in God's own image. And the first directive given by God is that we should have, as humans, dominion over the earth. This impetus for dominion is hardwired into humanity's DNA. And I contend that God's orientation toward dominion is a full throttle expression of God's care for that which materializes out of the mind of God. The command for dominion was not to lord over, but rather a command to serve and to protect. The original tragedy of the garden was not Eve's conversation with the evil one, but rather Adam and Eve's confusion that they were two distinct beings and not one. This grave and costly misperception formed the soil for the imperial desire to flourish. As it relates to people of African descent, the horror of the African Holocaust of our slavery and colonization was the separation of Africans from each other and the deculturalization that ensued. The stripping of our royal garments, the stripping of our indigenous faith practices and epistemologies, and the disturbance of sociocultural understandings. We were separated from our tribes and our clans. Interconnected Justice has invited you here today that collectively we might establish and celebrate Black Internationalism Day as an annual event. This is a day to recognize and to actualize our greatest power. Am I expectant that this day will produce a robust policy and social justice agenda? Yes. Do I vision a Pan-African voting rights movement for people of African descent globally? Yes. Does my political soul rejoice at the idea of global solidarity among people of African descent standing with Haiti? Yes. However, these well-conceived strategies are secondary. The primary output, the centerpiece of our experience, the fundamental reason that we are here is to choose each other Fundamentally, Black Internationalism Day is a moment consecrated and sanctified for us to choose each other. That choice is our greatest power. Putin, Trump, and Xi Jinping, they need to see us choosing each other. Before we can ask France to pay its debt to Haiti, French government first needs to see us choosing each other. We are serious about promoting democracy across Africa. First, African dictators everywhere need to see us choosing each other. Our greatest power is our choice as people of African descent to choose each other. The force of the ancestors be with us today, and know that Mother God is always watching over us. Happy Black Internationalism Day. It is my pleasure to present the ICJ Music Beat. Our young people in Goma, DRC, and our young people in Haiti chose each other. They worked together from many miles away, and together they designed and produced a spoken word slam that articulates their common strength, their common struggles, and their common vision. The ICJ Music Beat.
Ils auraient pu nous le dire pour que nos enfants les lisent, qu'ils comprennent leur histoire et être fiers d'être noirs.
Elle était si puissante avant leur arrivée, pas besoin de bombes atomiques, armes lourdes pour gagner des conquêtes. Elle était au vrai sens du terme le berceau de l'humanité, notre histoire était intacte sans falsification. Des savants que nous apprennent aujourd'hui dans des écoles venaient en Afrique pour apprendre. Elle était unie, la xénophobie n'avait pas un sens à l'époque, tellement tout le monde avait la même couleur de peau, le racisme n'était pas à la une.
Ils auraient pu nous le dire pour que nos enfants les lisent, qu'ils comprennent leur histoire et être fiers d'être noirs. Ils auraient pu nous le dire pour que nos enfants les lisent, qu'ils comprennent leur histoire et être fiers d'être noirs.
Moi je viens là où le ciel est bleu et rouge, je viens de la première république noire. Terre qui a connu l'inconnu de la connaissance. Je viens là où la noirceur est phare et la lumière est noire. Là où l'on fait l'effort et on reste fort malgré l'effort fait, l'injustice et la brutalité policière. On dit non à l'injustice qui transforme le vide en kidnapping et en poussière. Moi je porte dans mon cœur toutes les larmes de Flore Georges. Et je précise que le racisme est une illusion illusoire qui prétend être maître des horloges. Les hommes sont nés égaux, mais l'inégalité apporte la prison qui transforme les âmes en larmes. Et la vie devient une poison. Ils vont trouver des prétextes qui contextent avec des contextes qui éjaculent leur supériorité. Dites-leur qu'Haïti est la première république noire et l'Afrique est le berceau de l'humanité. S'ils vous disent que Dieu est blanc, dites-leur que le spirituel est incolore. S'ils vous disent que la science a une nationalité, dites-leur que l'intelligence n'a pas de résidence privée. Je viens de là où la vie est bicolore. Haïti, 20 le penseur.
Comme dans un rêve, je vois une Afrique lumineuse, une Afrique qui impose sa présence dans la galaxie. Une Afrique unie de nouveau pour défendre sa terre-mère, sabotée par des intrus malveillants. Je vois comme une vaillante, je projette ma vision, je visite le futur pour prédire l'avenir. Voilà, je vois une Afrique puissante, qui garde ses cultures et valeurs ancestrales avec jalousie, de peur qu'elles ne le perdent lorsque le vent de la culturation soufflera. Je vois une Afrique, des combattants, vaillants guerriers, des Amazones qui vont continuer la lutte de Lumumba, Sankara, Mandela, Marcus Garvey. Une Afrique consciente de la situation des guerres actuelles où le monde se plonge dans les ténèbres.
Asseyez-vous et prenez une chaise. Respirez, mettez-vous à votre aise. Parlons du Congo, ce grand pays d'Afrique, et d'Haïti, cette merveille qui règne en Amérique. Congo ma belle, Congo ma douce, je t'écris car mon amour inonde ma bouche. En fermant mes yeux, je te vois si fort. C'est Zaïre qui a combattu l'Afrique et en dehors. C'est Congo qui a rendu le monde plus rayonnant. Par son sol riche, solide et un sous-sol abondant. En toi je puise ma force et pour toi j'ai combat. Je le sourire aux lèvres car je porte ton sang. Congo ma maison, Congo ma case. De ton son j'écris ces paroles peintes à rose. Talent à souffert et je m'ai essuyé tes larmes pour y mettre une pause. Pour toi je vais sceller l'histoire des galères et je crée une nouvelle page. Réveille-toi Congo et combat fort avec moi. Je monterai si haut pour couvrir ton toit et sceller une alliance qui unit toute l'Afrique. Une symbiose qui chante la paix en musique. Nos héros se sont battus pour ta survie. De là si haut ils te voient prospérer réunis. Kabila, Lumumba, Kasavubu et les grands Mobutu. Un Congo si fort et fier pour lequel il lutte jusqu'au bout. Un Congo si fort, uni et fier pour lequel ils se battent jusqu'au bout. Black International Day, Journée internationale des hommes noirs.
Ils auraient pu nous le dire pour que nos enfants les lisent, qu'ils comprennent leur histoire et être fiers d'être noirs. Ils auraient pu nous le dire pour que nos enfants les lisent, qu'ils comprennent leur histoire et être fiers d'être noirs.
I cannot. Big ups, big ups. Big ups. I am so super proud of the work of Elian Feza and Alfred Chisamba from Goma, DRC, working so well with their brother Vons from Port-au-Prince, Haiti. That is a tactical expression of what Black internationalism is all about. When we jump over time zones, find each other, connect with each other's strength, and produce such a powerful message. They should have told us so. But we are telling this story now that our children might hear the echo of their history and their greatness for many years to come. Our keynote speaker is Dr. Brandon Byrd. Dr. Brandon Byrd is a historian of 19th and 20th century Black intellectual and social history, with a special focus on Black internationalism. He is the author of The Black Republic, African Americans and the Fate of Haiti. I'm holding it in my hands. Please order this book on Amazon, go find it. In addition to his research and teaching, Dr. Byrd is a co-editor of the Black Lives and Liberation series published by Vanderbilt University. He is a native of North Carolina and currently an associate professor in the Department of History at Vanderbilt University. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Brandon Byrd.
Wow, Bishop Tolton, thank you so much for having me here today, and thanks to everybody on the ICJ team. I mean, this is just an incredible event. So it's funny, Bishop asked me to say a few words about Black internationalism to try to sort of explain my perspective on this idea, this project. And in many ways, I feel what I'm doing here now is actually sort of, it's a little extra, because I mean, what is Black internationalism other than what is happening right here in this beautiful space, right? You know, so I'll say a few words, but really the definition is this, and the work that ICJ is doing, right? So anyways, let me try to add something to the conversation here. The early decades of the 20th century were rife with change, revolution, repression, war, tumult. This was the era of new technologies, of the steamship and the telegraph cable, mass communication, dislocation, great migrations. In this time period, the word internationalism was in the air, was everywhere. If you looked on the pages of the Negro World, the official newspaper of Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association, you saw internationalism there. One article from January 1926 proclaimed the Negro no longer thinks in the language of provincialism, but in the language of internationalism. He realizes that everywhere he is a Negro, and that if he does not stand together everywhere, he will in no time be able to stand nowhere. A few years after that, the Martinican writer, Jane Nardal, explained that World War I had encouraged the so-called world powers, of course, Imperial Europe and the United States, to envision themselves as part of a broader global community with shared interests, how you get something like the League of Nations, right? But she also said that this moment had given rise to a vague sentiment, in her words, among people of African descent, that they were part of a human community, but they had also created or strengthened different forms of identification of their own. She said that there was an emergent race consciousness, a strengthened idea of what it meant to be African in the quote unquote modern world. From these new ideas, new words have come the revealing terms, Nardal wrote: Afro-American, Afro-Latin. They confirm our thesis, all in casting a new meaning on the nature of this Black internationalism. So together, what happened in this era and what you see in the writings in the Negro World, the writings of Jane Nardal, other Black people in Paris, was a theory, a definition, a defining of Black internationalism. Okay. Taken together, this was a definition of an idea or a worldview of a cosmopolitanism. Okay. Black internationalism as an understanding of oneself as part of a broader Black world that exceeded imperial and national boundaries. Okay. What we see is a definition of a political practice, of a politics of struggle rooted in the understanding that people of African descent, or even the darker races of the world, or even all oppressed and colonized people, have a common struggle and a shared identity. Okay. We also see is a definition, a theory of an aspirational project. Okay. What these folks were describing was the work of standing together to achieve emancipation, okay, or in other times defined as progress, or in other places defined as a racial destiny, or eventually defined as freedom and liberation. Okay. Now, for the Garveyites and Nardal, what they set out to describe was something that they saw as, something new. Okay. But I think what they were naming also had very deep roots. Okay. So put simply, Black internationalism, I believe, is the history of Black people in the world that was created by the apocalypse of European settler colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade. Right? Black internationalism is the history of the peoples who invented themselves and imagined new worlds to come. Right? Let me try to be a little less abstract about that. Black internationalism is the history of Freedom's Journal, the first Black newspaper in the United States, which came out of the collaboration of its co-editors, Samuel Cornish, a Black man from Delaware, John Brown Russworm, a Black man from Jamaica. Black internationalism is the history of their collaboration and the product, the thing they produced, a US-based Black newspaper that carried news from all throughout the Black world, Africa and the Caribbean, North America, that circulated not just in the United States, but also Europe and Canada and Haiti. Black internationalism is the history of the Abolitionists International. It's the history of the international travels of Frederick Douglass and Sarah Parker Remond and Ida B. Wells. It's the history of the politics that emerged from those travels, of the connections drawn and the critiques built. It's the realization, the explication of somebody like Remond, who in traveling the world realized what racial capitalism had built, what it had done. It was her declaration that the free operatives of Britain are in reality brought into almost personal relations with the slave in their daily toil because they manufacture the material which the slaves have produced. Now, of course, and importantly, we have to note this, given the week and the man whose birthday we celebrate and honor this week, Black internationalism is the story of W.B. Du Bois's life. It's the history of the type of politics that he put on display at the first Pan-African Conference, which of course was convened by the Trinidadian barrister, Henry Sylvester Williams, and held in London in July 1900. On the final day of that landmark event, Du Bois read an address that was also signed by fellow Pan-Africanists Alexander Walters, Henry Sylvester Williams, and Henry D. Brown. Okay. In the metropolis of the modern world, London, in this closing year of the 19th century, Du Bois began, there has been assembled a Congress of men and women of African blood to deliberate solemnly upon the present situation and outlook of the darker races of mankind. The problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line, Du Bois continued. To paraphrase Du Bois's words, the fate of the millions of Black men in Africa, in America, in the islands of the sea, was intertwined with that of the brown and yellow masses everywhere. Our cause, as Du Bois described it, was really the cause of humanity. Okay? So in this long history, we see several unifying themes. Okay? We see the importance of communication networks in the building of Black internationalist politics, the importance of translation, of travel, of reconciling differences, but also recognizing our similarities, of identifying shared horizons, right? We also see the historical significance of Black and post-colonial states, especially Haiti, both as producers, right, and subjects of Black internationalist politics and thought. Now, this isn't just because Haiti was the first, right? That certainly explains much of it, right? That's not the only reason. Yeah. It's not that 1804 is the only date in Haitian history that matters, okay? It's because really Haiti is a bellwether, right? And other Black states and post-colonial states are bellwethers, right? The struggle of their people for their autonomy and sovereignty acutely reflects the conditions faced by African people globally, wherever and everywhere we exist. Okay? Now, this truth is evident in the transnational struggle for the liberation of Haiti during the first US occupation, which began in 1915 and would last till 1934. Okay? This truth is evident in the collaboration of the NAACP and the Union Patriotique. It's evident in Jean-Priest Mars's Negritude and anti-occupation speeches given by Haitians at the UNIA's Liberty Hall. This truth is evident in Du Bois's clear-eyed condemnation of the US occupation of Haiti as an attempt to rob Haiti to do the same things to Haitians, right, that were being done to African Americans, quote unquote, at home. Okay? This truth is clear in the demand for a second Haitian independence and a return of the freedom, in Du Bois's words, which had so clearly won, but had so clearly been historically denied. Okay. So today, Haiti again shows the urgency of internationalism, and I should mention too, also the cost of a rigid parochialism or an unwieldy rigid nationalism. Okay. As Du Bois argued at the Fourth Pan-African Congress, the question of the status of the Negro was not a domestic, parochial, or colonial policy problem. Instead, it was a great worldwide problem. The struggle for a living wage continues in Port-au-Prince. It continues in gentrified cities in the United States. The system that detains and deports Black immigrants and the system that wrongfully convicts Black US citizens are one and the same. So the case for Black internationalism, I believe, is this. Neither slavery nor colonialism stopped at the artificial boundaries drawn in Paris or in London or in Brussels, right? Wherever Black people live, they remain imperiled, to use Saidiya Hartman's words, by skewed life chances, limited access to health and education, premature death, incarceration, and impoverishment, by the afterlives of slavery. Common concerns demand common cause. Okay? The local, to paraphrase Du Bois again, is but a part of a global struggle. Again, thank you for having me here today. All gratitude to ICJ and all the wonderful Pan-Africanists in attendance here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Byrd. Can we give it up for our dear brother, Dr. Brandon Byrd? Thank you so, so kindly for grounding us today in that definition and understanding of Black internationalism. And please use the chat box to send love to each other, to send love to our speakers, questions to our speakers. You have this incredible opportunity for Ugandan activists who work with Bobby Wine to talk to our activists in Bahia at CEN who are gathered there together in a group. We're also gathered in Goma, DRC. You have an opportunity to have conversations between Goma, DRC, Haiti, the US, and Uganda. Let's definitely fill the chat with conversation between each other. And again, love for our speakers. Thank you again, Dr. Byrd. It was upon seeing one of your presentations that was really a catalyst for me as an activist to begin to really think about Black internationalism and the ways in which interconnected justice could become very involved in that movement. Please see the love that you're getting in the chat, Dr. Byrd. It's deeply, deeply appreciated. Dr. Nemata Blyden specializes in African and African diasporian history. She is the author of Africans and Africa, which I also hope you can see because I'm holding it up. Please get this on Amazon too, which examines the longstanding relationship between African Americans and the continent of Africa and its people. Influence, engagement, and identification with the continent on the part of Africans in the Americas and the Caribbean have been central to her work. Dr. Blyden has lived in Africa, Europe, and the Soviet Union, and yet she remains engaged with issues pertaining to African development. She is currently a professor at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and I am very proud that she has accepted the position of also being the academic in residence for interconnected justice. Let's give some love to Dr. Nemata Blyden. Dr. Blyden.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks a lot. I have a couple of slides that I'll throw up. They're not crucial, but I think that they will lend something. So give me a second. I'm not going to talk a lot to open those up. Any conversation that that includes an ability to talk about W. Du Bois, I'm excited by. And so I start with some quotes by Dr. Du Bois. Dr. Byrd has, of course, mentioned his importance in the story that we tell about Black internationalism and Pan-Africanism. And Bishop Tolton has asked me to talk about Black internationalism from the perspective of Africa and where it fits in Africa. And of course, Du Bois, as many of you know, stress the importance of bringing Africa into any kind of conversation about Pan-Africanism, what we're calling Black internationalism, and the importance of connection between Africa and its diaspora. And here are some quotes I think that reflect that, the notion that for a long period of time, Africa was written out of history, the notion that African Americans and African history are integrally connected, right? This idea of a common history, an idea of one long memory that people of African descent share. So I think we can't talk about Black internationalism without locating it centrally in the work of W. Du Bois. So I'm very happy that we're doing it and we're celebrating him. So I'm, Black internationalism, as we've heard from Dr. Byrd, is something that we really can't pin down with a definition. But I'm going with a definition used by one scholar, which describes Black internationalism as an insurgent political culture that emerged in response to slavery, colonialism, and white imperialism, and one which centered on visions of freedom and liberation movements among African-descended people worldwide. It captured their efforts to forge transnational collaborations and solidarities with other people of color. And perhaps that's why we're using the term Black internationalism rather than Pan-Africanism, right? Because Black internationalism, I suppose, opens up this kind of collaboration and activism with people other than people of African descent. So I was asked to speak on whether or not Black internationalism is important and relevant for countries in Africa. This was one of the tasks that Pastor Tolton gave me. And I would say that there are two ways of answering that question. The first one being an examination of Africa's own engagement in Black internationalism, and I'll speak to that a little bit later. That is its own concerns and responses to issues affecting other people of color. Its efforts to forge collaborations and solidarities with other people of color. And then the second way of answering it might be to look at Black international activities, concerns, or attention directed at issues on the continent, on the part of, say, other diasporans or other peoples of color, right? And this is what Dr. Byrd has spoken about, right? Those in diaspora and their efforts to create those solidarities, right? And so in that sense, I would argue, looking at these two ways of thinking about Black internationalism, the concept is indeed relevant for countries in Africa. But then there's also the question, and this is dicey, right, of whether or not Africa has been dissented, right, in this term, Black internationalism. And I thank you for that question, Pastor Tolton, because some critics of Black international scholarship have indeed criticized it for decentering Africa. All right, and arguably that's a valid criticism. A lot of the scholarship has indeed focused on the activities of those in diaspora and their international sensibilities, either directed at Africa or elsewhere. But having said that, there is a long history of activism and engagement on the part of women and men of African descent, recognizing the importance of Africa. Here's an example right there. I started with talking about Du Bois, but there are others. Right, so yes, it's true that some of the scholarship has decentered, but in terms of what we're calling Black international activity, I think we can go back and Dr. Byrd just laid out the history of Black international activity that was largely or often directed at Africa or centered Africa. And so this question also that I was asked to talk about as to whether or not liberation movements of the 1960s was a Black liberation movement connected to the American Civil Rights Movement. Others have written about that. We have lots of examples of those kinds of connections. And also examples of Black internationalism within Africa. And when we talk about the Black liberation movements particularly of the 1960s and 70s, we can see clear connections between what was happening on the continent and what was happening in the diaspora, for my purposes here, the United States. And we see, and lots of scholars have written about the way the civil rights movement was influenced by African decolonization and liberation movements and vice versa. The ways in which Africans educated in the United States influenced by their experience in America during a period of segregation, often during a period when Black Americans were marginalized, went back to their countries motivated by those liberation struggles and pushed, right, for independence, pushed for liberation on the continent. And we can also see the ways in which civil rights activists were galvanized by independence movements on the continent, influenced by it, recharged as African countries began to gain to gain their independence, and that motivated and really influenced the civil rights movement. Bishop Tolton asked me to also give some examples of Black internationalism within Africa, and that was a challenge, a little bit, not a challenge to find, but I had to really think about that question, to think about what you were trying to get me to get to, because again, so many people writing about Black international activities often focus the direction, right, from the diaspora to Africa. What are we, daughters and sons in the diaspora, doing for the continent of our ancestors, right? What are we in the diaspora doing to uplift the continent, right? And sometimes in problematic ways, we could make that argument. So I really had to think about how I wanted to answer this question. And so, you know, of course, African populations have engaged historically with African-American issues. The Pan-African movement involved Africans in great numbers, particularly in the later Pan-African conflict. There's always been that engagement, and it's always been a two-way street. And I think many of us will make that argument. But I wanted to bring it back to sort of contemporary discussions about what I'm going to call Black international engagement of Africa, right? And I think Africa's response to the George Floyd protests on the continent, right, is an example of what I would think of as Black internationalism emerging out of the continent. Right, during the George Floyd movement, we saw lots of protests on the continent. As you can see from some of these images, Africans were speaking out on these protests. Mukhtar Karim's quote that I have here talks about this notion that Black lives must matter throughout the world, not only in its largest economy, right? It's possible to create racial justice on a foundation of economic justice. This is true in Minneapolis as it is in Mombasa, right? Linking, right, issues on the continent with issues in the diaspora. So not for the first time, but I think in a really clear way, we see, right, Black internationalism in some ways, right, going in the other direction, right, coming out of the continent, speaking to issues that are happening in the diaspora. With the protests. We even had a statement from the chairperson of the AU on it, right, condemning the murder of George Floyd that occurred in the United States of America at the hands of law enforcement officers and wishes, right? So a very, very robust, if you will, response from the African continent with respect to what was going on in the United States. So that's one place where I would argue, and I think also Africa's response to COVID-19, right? I mean, again, we've always sort of looked at it coming from the other direction, you know, African Americans or people from the diaspora speaking out on issues happening in Africa with Ebola or other, you know, challenges that the continent has faced. For the first time, well, not for the first time, but one of the few times, right? Again, we see the gaze in the other direction with African nations speaking out against what the sort of inequities that we all saw, right, in response to COVID. And then, of course, we all lived through 2019 with the sort of homecomings, right? The welcoming of brothers and sisters from the diaspora by countries like Ghana or other countries. And I would argue that as a kind of way that we can talk of Black internationalism, right? From the perspective of Africa. So that's, you know, I'll sort of wrap up there. Let me stop sharing my screen. I will wrap up there by saying that that's the way that I've chosen to think about Black internationalism with respect to Africa. You know, having said that, I also, you know, want to throw a question to Bishop Tolton to speculate on, you know, how we're thinking about Black internationalism versus Pan-Africanism. Right, Black international in some ways gives us a space for a more global outlook, but I want to also make a plea for also keeping us engaged with issues surrounding Pan-Africanism. So I thank you.
Awesome, awesome. Can we please give love to our precious, precious, precious sister, Dr. Nemata Blyden. You are a gift to us and to our movement. And I'm blessed to have this association between you and Interconnected Justice. I believe, and I said this to you and to Dr. Byrd, that I perceive Black internationalism as a road and as a highway. And my thought is that the impetus for a spiritual reclamation, the innate emotional desire to be reconnected, the thought work involved in building the highway and building the road, for me is Black internationalism. And then the projects, the off-ramps that it takes us to are the Pan-African projects of actually doing the work of building economic bridges, of building new curriculums for our kids everywhere on the continent and throughout the diaspora that are teaching them about African heritage and Black identity, and then they get on Zoom and share that with each other. These are the Pan-African projects that the road of Black internationalism takes us to. You can move beyond the continent on that road and then find connectivity with other Black and brown people who may not be of African descent, but our connection to them, of course, is that as Black and brown people, they are also subjected to white supremacy. I am distinctly and foremost a Pan-Africanist who believes in Black internationalism and the need for us as people of African descent to spiritually heal from the ways in which we've been separated. But I also very much so believe that we have not only an opportunity, but an obligation to connect with other people who understand the very oppression that we understand, because they are people of darker skin, darker skin as well. So thank you so much, Dr. Blyden. I am going to open it up for questions in just a moment. But before we do so, France, Annie Harold, would you come back to us, because I don't speak French? I want to make sure that the French speakers are clear about the opportunity for interpretation.
Of course, I am glad to do that. Pour ceux et celles qui veulent une traduction en français, je vous prie de cliquer sur l'option, et si vous souhaitez avoir une traduction française sur notre plateforme.
Thank you so much, Annie. Dr. Silvio Almeida is currently the Tinker Visiting Professor at the Institute of Latin American Studies at Columbia University. He is a lawyer, professor, and political activist in Brazil. Currently, he is a visiting professor at the Institute of Latin American Studies at the Columbia University SIPA School, where he is teaching a course on race, law, and culture in Latin America. Silvio is president of the Luiz Gama Institute, a human rights NGO that has had an important participation in the debates and formulations about affirmative action in Brazil. Dr. Almeida was also the rapporteur of the Special Commission of Jurists established by the Brazilian Congress to propose the reforms to create an efficient anti-racist legal system. I am delighted to welcome Dr. Almeida, and I'm going to ask that after he speaks, we take some questions. Bahia, Brazil, please prepare yourself to ask some questions. The activists who work with Bobby Wine in Uganda, please prepare to ask a few questions. Dr. Dorcas Chebet in Kenya, we also want to hear from you. Dr. Almeida, how blessed are we to have you with us today? Please.
Thank you so much. I would like to congratulate all the people helping to build Black International Day, the person Bishop Joseph Tolton. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Tolton, for your perseverance and hope. Greetings to all my brothers and sisters who are here or who follow the event online. I'd like to congratulate my compatriots in Brazil. Bom dia. É prazer estar aqui. At this moment, I'm the USA as vice professor at Columbia University, but I'm here with you talking from my African Brazilian experience. African Brazilian, I must emphasize, because it's infeasible to understand Brazil without understanding Africa. The intellectual tries to reveal the Brazilian society are at the same time attempts to read our undeniable and always present African origins. How taught to us the Brazilian intellectual Leila Gonzalez, we Brazilians are Americans. Brazil is part of America. It's not the racist violence that unites us. That's why what unites us is the struggle for liberation, always from a global perspective. Otherwise, how to explain the influence of the Black Power movement on the Brazilian Black movement? Or the impact of the idea of Black awareness in Brazil? This global exchange of concepts, strategies, and tactics, I name it grammars of diaspora. In my opinion, there will be Black liberation outside the view and the practice of Black internationalism. I was delighted when I know that the great intellectual reference to guide us in this campaign is W.B. Du Bois. The importance of the work of W.B. Du Bois transcends the borders of his home country, the United States of America. His books, his articles, and his political interventions constitute one of the most important intellectual legacies of all times. Du Bois is an author who starts from the Black experience to understand the world and its most complex plots. Du Bois shows how American society organized itself after the Civil War to reconstitute on a new basis the subalternity of the Black people. The violence of slavery has been replaced by the violence of racism in an industrialized society. With this, the Du Bois teach us that freedom and citizenship were never independent of the Black condition. That is, racism has always worked as a limiting factor for any emancipatory perspectives. I would like to mention two essential concepts of Du Bois, in my opinion, that can help us a lot to understand our world: vile and double consciousness. Two concepts: vile and double consciousness. The vile is something that prevents us from being seen as we are, but it also prevents us from seeing the world as it is. In the sense, Du Bois' metaphor concerns how racial relations in the United States were constituted in American history. In the words of Du Bois, that's when the almost immediate realization came to me that I was different from the others, or similar, perhaps, in terms of heart and vital force and aspirations, but separated from their world by an enormous veil. Blacks and whites live simultaneously in the same world and different worlds. Blacks and whites are creations of this permanent process of dividing life by a veil, in which each side implies a different way of existing. Race is therefore an existential condition that, in addition to physical characteristics, is defined by the process of formation of our souls. Yes. Racism is, in effect, a process of creating split and shattered souls. With the treatment of race as an existential condition, Du Bois inaugurated what will later be known as the field of studies on whiteness. Race is the result of multiple forms of domination, violence, and economic exploitation at a global level, which manifests itself differently in different contexts. Black people, as different as they are on the same side of the veil. This conclusion is what leads Du Bois to activism in favor of civil rights and the construction of Pan-Africans. The second concept brought by Du Bois of double consciousness or double awareness. According to Du Bois, being Black, I quote Du Bois, it's a peculiar sensation, this dual consciousness, this experience of always seeing yourself through the eyes of others, of measuring your soul by the ruler of the world that enjoys looking at you with contempt and pity. Thus, a great dilemma arises. To be citizen of any country in the world, it can be in the United States, Brazil, South Africa, United Kingdom, Sierra Leone, or Haiti, is to be permanently split. Permanently split. This impossibility of reconciling being a citizen and being Black. This conflict is something constitutive of the history of the North American Black, but not the only American Black. It's constitutive of Brazil, the Black people in Brazil, the Black people in the United Kingdom, the Black people in all parts of the world. But it's also constitutive of the history of Black people in every country. In this way, the history of the Black people in the United States is the history, in the words of Du Bois, of this desire to become aware of himself as a man, to merge his double self into single, better, and truer individual. Fusion, therefore, depends on overcoming this double awareness, which is not only a mental process, but is, above all, a political process in which reconciliation with oneself depends on the removal of the veil that prevents the Black person from seeing himself. Overcoming the boundaries between worlds imposed by racism depend on political activism and intellectual activism too. That is why we want Black Internationalism Day. Race is the result of multiple forms of domination, violence, and economic exploitation at a global level, which manifests itself differently in different contexts. Black men and women in the world, no matter how different they are, share the same side of the veil. I speak from Brazil, but it's necessary to understand that the idea of a Black Internationalism Day is the idea to unite us in the same proposal, the proposal to struggle for a world of liberation, a world of freedom, a world of liberty. So I'm very, very happy. I'm delighted to be here with you. I expect in the next meetings, we can construct a path to do a Black Internationalism Day and to reunite all parts of the world in the same effort. Thank you so much.
Wow, that was just incredibly prolific. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Much love to Brazil. Thank you, thank you, thank you for framing Black internationalism in the ways in which you have, speaking to how it relates to our father Du Bois and how it speaks to your experience and the experience of Afro-Brazilians. We're deeply, deeply grateful to you. It is really important now that we take questions and allow you all to speak to each other. I'm going to ask that we would bring in our brothers and sisters from Bahia. I'm going to ask if we would bring in our brothers and sisters from Uganda and Dr. Dorcas Chibet. And Professor Kenneth Ngwa as well. I would just love to hear your thoughts at this point. We'll bring in Dr. Blyden, Dr. Byrd, Leila Howe as well. And let's just have 10 minutes of some conversation. And actually, Dr. Byrd, may I start with you? Do you have a question for Dr. Nemata Blyden, or a comment or a reflection on what she has said or what Professor Almeida has said? I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but you think quickly for a living, I know you do. So we'll start with you and then we'll kind of move around. But I want to give you guys a chance to talk to each other.
Yeah, so I mean, honestly, no questions immediately come to mind. It's more thought provoking. I'm reflecting on what Dr. Almeida just said. I believe he mentioned that it is hard for him to envision any project of liberation outside of an international framework. And so I guess I'm sitting here thinking in agreement with that and trying to envision and being in agreement with that, you know, trying to envision what those solidarities may look like in this very, what is a very, in many ways, precarious moment. You know, a moment of various right-wing, rise of right-wing nationalisms, age of war, as we're seeing today, but also an era in which, you know, new technologies, new spaces have opened up where we can have these conversations, where we can discuss, you know, what these developments mean for us specifically. So I don't know. I suppose, and that's not a question. It's not what you asked for, but it's a reflection in where I'm at right now.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Dr. Blyden.
Yeah, same thing. I don't really have many questions, but you know, just can speak to the ways in which I think all of these presentations are connected in terms of thinking about, you know, our understanding of ourselves, right, as part of the same world, right? Whether we're talking about being in Brazil, as Dr. Almeida just talked about, right? Or here centrally located in the United States, or on the continent, right? We're all, as Dr. Almeida so nicely put it, on the same side of the veil. And I think it behooves us to constantly remember that as we live in this world that Dr. Byrd has just spoken about, where, you know, we're in many ways under attack.
No question about it.
Our history is.
Our history is imminently under attack, particularly here in the United States. I have not had the pleasure of introducing Leila Howe because she will speak after questions, but Leila, you're here with us. And certainly if you have a reflection or a comment or a question for any of the speakers thus far, please.
Well, certainly. I mean, there is a theme, I think, which is that really in the fight for our liberation, our consciousness about wanting to be international and wanting to join hands with our brothers and sisters across the African diaspora really kind of rings home to me. When I speak, you'll hear my history of some, you know, 50 years of being an activist in Britain. But I know personally that it's only in the action of seeking liberation and fighting for equal rights and justice where we're able to forge really serious links with Africans in Africa, Africans in the United States of America, and Africans in the Caribbean. So in listening particularly to the last speaker, that's really what came home to me. The political and intellectual fight for our liberation is what will really forge this kind of international movement.
Thank you so much, Leila. Dr. Byrd, in his comments said, as he was reflecting on Dr. Almeida's presentation, he said, how might this actually kind of work and manifest itself? And so that's why I wanted to bring in our young people in Uganda, Danny Magic and Rema, Pastor Simon. Those of you that work in the Bobi Wine movement, I'm curious about how will a Black internationalist coalition support you all as you try to secure the integrity of the vote in Uganda? You all are clear that Bobi Wine didn't lose because of a lack of support. He lost, as Rema has said to me before, because of the tear gas and the bullet. And I think that that's connected, and I want to bring in Brazil as well, because they're about to have an election and they want to absolutely get rid of Bolsonaro, who's deeply connected to Trump. He's already talking about stop the steal in Brazil before the election is anywhere underway. How could a connection between what's happening in the election in Brazil coming up and the work that you all are doing in Uganda actually bolster what's happening in both places? I just want to use that as a tactical example. So I'm going to go to Uganda first. If we can bring in Bahia second, and then I'm going to let Dr. Almeida kind of give us a final thought and close out this section before the next section of speakers. Rema in Uganda, welcome.
Thank you, Bishop. I'm glad to be in Africa. Right now, Pascal, I'm with my sisters and brothers in South Africa. I'm called Rema from Godwine House, Uganda, Kenya, in politics, because of the way things are working. Currently, for us, I think we lost the election. We did not lose. We won the election. I'm 100% sure we won the election. I can justify to that because I was an agent, I was a supervisor in Toronto, where I had to sleep in the sun just to protect the Bureau. So I'm too positive we won the election. But because of the having in Uganda to not allow it to happen. Also, one of the things of movement. The campaign was like, we were in our war. Up to date, we still have prisoners. Political prisoners, just because of the campaign we were having, the election was massively like our war. So we cannot say we lost it. If it was a fair ground, we would say we won it.
Thank you, Rema. Thank you, Rema. Thank you. Thank you. We struggled to hear you, but we heard the spirit of what you said. Can we go to Bahia? So super excited to see such a wonderful group of our people there in Bahia. Marcos Rezende, would you like to give us a reflection or your thoughts about how perhaps connecting the securing of the voting of the vote in Brazil may be connected to what they're doing in Uganda and ultimately what we're trying to do to secure the vote in Georgia and in other places in the US. But Marcos, would love to hear your thought.
Hi, Bishop Tolton. Hi, everybody. But I will pass my moment to show my friend Beto Infante.
Sure.
He comes from Guinea-Bissau.
Yes.
And he is a very important guy here from our people in Brazil and to connect our people around the world.
Yes.
So Beto, your turn. And Silvio Almeida, thank you so much to stay with us and to learn more and more for our people around the world. We need you, brother. We need you.
Amen.
Yeah, we're gonna thank a lot. We are here. I'm here like interpreter here in Spain. I'm an international coordination of political of Saint here in Bahia. So we are here very happy. We're really very happy to see all of you. And this makes us understand that we Black, we must unite it. We must unite it anywhere that we are. Doesn't matter the place that we are. We can be there in, I'm gonna say in Africa, in the United States, here in Bahia. We all have to enjoy it together. We have to come together in order to keep fighting the system that been killing all of us. So we thank a lot. We are here appreciating all that you're talking. Make sure that we all are here united. And then we do believe that the system that we're fighting, we're gonna overcome it. The fight still, but we keep so enjoying together. We keep so connecting together. That is the way to overcome the system that has been killing our people. Here in Brazil, Dr. Silvio Almeida, as he already said, we are facing a very big problem here. Our young people being killed every day. Yeah. So we must fight, we must unite together in order to overcome the situation. Because the politician of this racial system, that these white people being connected here, that have been leading us here. Because Bolsonaro here in Brazil, we Black, we must come together because we are here in Brazil, we are more than enough here in this country. So we must join together, we must come together in order to fight against the system. Because we Black people, we're just not gonna stay just talking. We need to come to the place of power. That's the way to overcome the situation, or else we're gonna keep staying in the same place. So we're not gonna stay only talking, but we need to come to the position of power to be, I'm gonna say, fight for being the president, to be the Senate, to be different other place. That's the way to overcome the situation. So we thank you a lot here in Bahia, here in Spain. We are together. We send the power to all of Black people in different parts of the world. Thank you for now. May God bless you, all of you.
That is just awesome, Beto. And let me say this quickly because my producers are telling me I've got to move on. I want to see Stacey Abrams in Bahia, Brazil, standing on stage with Professor Almeida, declaring that voting rights for people of African descent is not just an issue for African Americans, but a global issue. I want to see her voting rights effort become a global campaign that we connect with Afro-Brazilians and push back on Stop the Steal before it happens. I'd like to see that campaign also reach its tentacles into Uganda. I'd like to see Stacey Abrams standing on stage with Bobby Wine, declaring the need for the integrity of voting rights. And then let's go to Haiti when they have their next free election and declare that there must be free and fair elections as well. Dr. Almeida, please close out this section in the next 60 seconds, and then I'm going to introduce our next speaker.
Okay, thank you so much. I think the challenge to create Black International Day are basically three challenges to create this event. I understand that the Black International Day is only one day to celebrate. It should think about all strategies in the entire year and in all moments of the struggle against racism for three challenges. Understand that the struggle for liberation is in the same time local and global. Local and global. We need to understand the local and global conditions of the Black conditions. It's not easy to understand the situation of Black people in Brazil. Brazil is a very, not only Brazil, but I'm talking in this moment about Brazil. To understand the Brazilian situation is very, very difficult. To understand what is being Black in Brazil is very difficult. The second challenge is create permanent forms of dialogue and cooperation. Permanent forms of dialogue and cooperation. I'm looking forward to understand more about the situation of my brothers and sisters in all parts of Africa, Uganda, Sierra Leone, in Britain. I need understanding what happens with my brothers in all parts in the world. The third challenge, in my opinion, is create practical, concrete strategies to encourage the intellectual production and political activities. Encourage and finance too is very important. To support, to give material support for the strategies and the intellectual production and political activities. Three challenges: understand global and local, create permanent forms of dialogue and cooperation, and create strategies of support, material and spiritual support too. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Almeida, for laying out those three strategies. We're going to come to that third strategy in terms of material support in our final presentation. It is such a joy for me to present to you Leila Howe. Leila became involved in the Black Power movement in the UK in the 1960s. She worked for the Institute of Race and Relations from 1970 on as an information officer. Following the New Cross fire in January 1981, in which 13 young Black people died, Hassan was co-organizer of the 20,000-person Black People's Day of Action March through London that took place on March 2nd and is now described as a turning point in Black British identity. A 2013 exhibition about British Black Power movements in Britain at the Photo Fusion Gallery in Brixton features an interview with Leila Hassan. In 2019, she co-edited Here to Stay, Here to Fight, a collection of writings from Race Today, published by Pluto Press, to give us an historical view of work that has been done around Black internationalism. I am delighted to present from the UK, Leila Howe.
Thank you, and it's a real pleasure to be here today. Sorry about, the sun has just decided to come out after a day of huge rain, so sorry for the shadow. But I just want to say thank you particularly to Bishop Tolton for the invitation, and it really is an honor to be part of an international platform. So many meetings, I think, that we all attend are very kind of insular and parochial, and we talk about our condition without really having the connections with people who are facing the same situation as us abroad. And so this is really, really an important day, and I'm very pleased to be here. I probably come from a period in history when in the late 60s, 70s and 80s, where Pan-Africanism and internationalism was something really which was our bread and butter and that we lived by. Fortunate, very, very fortunate to be part of an organization that was based around the ideas of somebody called C.L.R. James, who has written the definitive history of Haiti called the Black Jacobins. And I knew C.L.R. personally, looked after him, and he lived with the collective in which I was a member. So the strand that I have with today's meeting is really very, very deep. As part of the Black Power movement in Britain, very much influenced by the Black Power movement in the United States, our reading list was Black Reconstruction, W.E. Du Bois, The Souls of Black Voice, Nkrumah's work on imperialism and colonialism, Frantz Fanon, Black Skin, White Mask, and The Wretched of the Earth. And this was the bread and butter literature which I grew up with, understanding that the fight we were facing in Britain was in fact an international fight and had its roots in Africa and the struggle against colonialism and imperialism in Africa. So who am I? I'm a person who was born in Britain, but for part of my life lived in Tanzania, in Zanzibar, in East Africa. I have witnessed firsthand colonialism in Africa because I witnessed the flags, the British flags being taken down in Kenya, in Tanganyika as it was then called, and understood the population's desire for the end of colonialism in Africa, of which my father in particular was a huge part of that movement as a Pan-Africanist. So having understood colonialism and the nature of colonialism because of the revolution in Zanzibar, which is another story of the British handing to the Arab minority and the African majority then taking power, I came back to Britain. And the Britain I came back to was one very different from the one I had left, because the population in Britain was changing. Now, thousands of immigrants from the Caribbean and from the Asian subcontinent, formerly colonial peoples, were flocking into Britain to find work. The reason they were finding work was the defeat of the anti-colonial struggle in their own countries. Many of them who came here had been active fighting the British to get out of Jamaica, Trinidad, India, and Pakistan. And when those movements really just replaced like with like, in terms that their leaders really didn't change the lot of the ordinary person, when Britain wanted to rebuild itself after the war and asked for immigrants to come over to work, we came in our thousands. So I came back to a Britain that was having huge migration, and therefore the atmosphere in Britain was very racist, very hostile, and of course very much that we are white people superior to these immigrants who are coming here and need to find work. And at that time, there was a huge movement for social change in the world. We had the Vietnam War, we had the women's liberation movement, particularly in the United States. We had the movements for colonial freedom in Mozambique, Angola, and Guinea-Bissau. So there was an air of change in the atmosphere. And as young people, we wanted to be part of that. So I joined the Black Power movement in Britain, and we campaigned very much on the lines, I must say, of the Black Panther Party in the United States. Our demands were taken lock, stock and barrel from the Black Panthers: the demand for decent housing, the demand for decent education, the demand for the right to be tried by our peers. And we all produced newspapers. And this movement was a very large movement. It was in every city in Britain, in Birmingham, in Manchester, areas that won't mean much to you, but every major conurbation of where people lived had a Black Power movement. And we produced our newspapers. The newspaper I produced was called Black Voice. Other groups produced Freedom News, Grassroots, and all espousing very much the kind of third world liberation politics of that time. But after the demise of that movement, I joined something called the Race Today Collective. And the collective was edited by a Trinidadian journalist called Leila Howe, a person who had come to fame because he'd been successful in a trial called the Mangrove 9 trial. And if anyone's ever interested in the history of Britain, you will know that the Mangrove 9 trial was a turning point when the police framed and arrested people on a demonstration, and they were all found not guilty, primarily by a white jury. And so Darkus took over this journal, and when we met, he said it was going to be formed around Jamesian ideas. So CLR James really was the mentor around our organization. We were a young collective. Our youngest member was 18, the oldest was probably 27, 28. And we decided that as part of our activism, we would produce a journal. So publishing became very, very important to us. And you must remember, in the era that we're talking about no social media. So everything we did was telephone and letters. And yet we were successful in bringing out a journal for 14 years, which covered not only the Black struggles that were going on and the immigrant struggles that were going on in Britain, but the struggles that were going on in America, in Africa, in Europe. And we were able to build a network of people who were able to give us the news and information about the different struggles that were going on in those countries. I'm not going to name drop, but I would say that any day in Race Today, you could come in and you could meet Walter Rodney, the great Guyanese historian whose book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, was really like a Bible for us in the Black Power movement. You could meet Maurice Bishop, the person who had tried to take power in Grenada, and of course, with the help of the Americans, that revolution was curbed. You could meet Wole Soyinka, you could meet Ngugi wa Thiong'o, you could meet these great people who in their own countries were struggling to make change, and were doing it not only through political action, but through arts, culture, and literature. And part of our movement was very much stemmed in arts and culture, and people who were being attracted to reggae music and to the reggae dub poetry and the kind of cultural movements that were going on at that time. But as I've said before, we were in an era, and I count myself as really fortunate, where there was an interconnected kind of internationalism to our struggles. We could not bring out a journal of Race Today that talked about a strike of Black workers in a car plant, say in Dagenham in Essex, without talking about what was going on with West Indian workers in Toronto, without talking about what was going on in Dominica, where the Rastafarian movement was being persecuted by the government. It was in our DNA that we were really international people. I spoke on the same platform as Amilcar Cabral, saying that Britain had to really support the struggles that were going on at that time in Guinea-Bissau, and of course people from Frelimo would come over, people from Angola, from the MPLA. So it really was an era where internationalism kind of worked, where we believed in it, and really it was the mainstay of our struggle. Of course, things have moved on, and I'm not going to talk, because I'm not currently politically active in the way that I was. I'm happy to talk generally about what's going on in Britain, but not really in any detail. But I think you all know that the Black Lives Matter movement in Britain was huge as well, of young Black people who came out in support of the movement against the killing of George Floyd. But one of the main things that we did, and this is where interconnected justice is really kind of attractive to me, is that we did something called the International Book Fair of Black, Radical and Third World books. And this really was the meeting place of continents. And we would invite publishers from all over the world, as from Third World and from Africa, to come to England on a 3-day conference. We'd have seminars of discussions. We'd have cultural evenings of poetry and music. Jane Cortez came over. Amiri Baraka from the United States came over. Ntozake Shange, the American poet, came over. So we had our links, and we would organize these book fairs every year, which we did for 14 years, but which we called a meeting of continents. And we would invite people over to talk and tell us about their struggles, what they were doing, and how we could support them. So it was real, it was tangible. It wasn't a discussion forum. It was physically people coming together to discuss what was going on. The Bishop has mentioned that the New Cross Fire, which really is the high point of Black political action in Britain. And one of the reasons I'm really pleased today to speak is because whenever I have spoken at international conferences, people are not even aware that there has been a Black radical movement in the United Kingdom that was fighting for change and was really successful in fighting for change. And so I look on today really as an opportunity for our brothers and sisters in all the countries that are represented today to invite them to learn about what we did in Britain and what we are still doing in Britain to change. Because as everyone says, for us, it's very precarious. Up until last year, we were part of Europe. We believed, you know, we were part of the European conception of whatever that was. But as you know, Britain, in harking back to its colonialism, days of colonialism, and when Britain was great, decided to leave Europe. And so once again, we're isolated from even people who just live 30 or 40 miles across the continent to us. And so we really have to make these connections again. There are some films which I didn't mention to Bishop Tolton, which are available on Amazon Prime called Uprisings. And you'll be able to get a first-hand knowledge for people who participated in the Black liberation struggle in Britain in the late 70s and 80s, because he talks about the New Cross Fire, the mass mobilization for it, but also the Brixton Uprisings. And this is where for 3 or 4 days in April 81, young Black men, some Black women, fought the police successfully for 3 days against what they were doing to the Black community in terms of policing and police oppression and police brutality. So I suppose my message today is from our specific struggles of being
because you see the side for this is 38.5 and this one is 38. It's good.
So sorry, Leila.
That's okay.
Okay.
From our very specific, I mean, we are a small minority in Britain. Britain has 54 million people. We number 2 million. There has been a growth in African immigration in the last 2 decades. So there are more African immigrants than there were. When we first came, it was mainly immigrants from the Caribbean and from the Indian subcontinent. But now there is a very strong African population in Britain. But from our specific movement, we were able to see the connections with our brothers and sisters and act upon it and do something about it and call forums and conferences and have links in terms of what we could do to support their struggles. And we were able to do that successfully. So I did call my talk after C.L.R. James's famous book, The Future in the Present, but I think it's really talking about the future in the past and the present. And whenever I speak, I say to people, I am not active now in the way I was, and the socio-economic and social movements of today are completely different from when I was active. But if there's anything people can learn from what we did, and what we did successfully to produce a journal independently for 14 years that was about Black liberation struggles across the world, is really something, you know, that needs to be recognized. If there's anything in terms of what I say or that could support the young struggles of today, then please, then what we did was not in vain. And that's what we really need to do. So I will leave it there. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Leila. Thank you so much. Our next speaker, Brian Kagoro, says that memory is the terrain of the oppressed. And that is why your particular contribution here today was so pivotal, Leila, because it is critical that we know that we can be because you have been. I'm deeply grateful for your unique perspective. Let's now move to our last presentation, and that is Dr. Brian Kagoro, who is Director of Justice and Intersectionality at Open Society Foundations. It is a pre-recorded message. Please don't drop off. Please stay with us. His presentation is so important because everything that we've said thus far is incredibly powerful and visionary, but none of it happens unless we figured out a way to properly fund the revolution and fund the movement. So we're going to move through Brian's presentation. We're going to bring our panelists back. We're going to ask that Brian Knight, Dorcas Chibet, ICJ DRC join us in our last 5 minutes of questions before we end. Dr. Brian Kagoro, how we will finance the movement.
Fortunately for us as Black folk, we learned for years to organize without money, or with little.
Yes.
And I want to suggest, though, that the global sort of impact that I think the global Pan-African movement, Pan-African Federalist movement, and the movement that you're starting need to have requires that the question of resources and resourcing be seriously thought out. And I think there are three models. The one is resourcing that we get from the well-wishers. The second is resources that we put in ourselves by engaging in doing certain entrepreneurial things that generate the resources we need. The third are resources we get from aligning, right? There are resources that are in cash, some in kind. We have certain parts of the Black world. You know, I'm sitting in Kenya, number of young people who are so competent and capable in using technology platforms, creating applications. And you know, it was in Kenya that a young Black man created Ushahidi. Ushahidi was used by the Japanese when they faced a tsunami, right? Used by the US military in part of its fight against global terrorism. So, but it was made by these young people here. So we have these competencies and capacities where we could leverage whatever is a strength in the different locations as a resource for enabling struggles in other spaces. Ultimately, the global solidarity for our collective liberation must, you can't necessarily get a donor-funded revolution, that's what one wants.
That's right.
You can't necessarily get transformation as a work of charity. But consciousness is built through contribution. Those who can't contribute money are able to contribute time or ideas or their voice or their presence. And our people have always done this. I think if you ask a simple question, what will it take for this noise to be loud enough? Every Black or brown church, mosque, every Black or brown led company or NGO or foundation could chip in just joining if all we did was got all globally, all the Black owned and run media companies, social media platforms to contribute to this narrative shift, this narrative, it would be a phenomenal breakthrough. So that's my take on, if we believe in this, we can make it work. Absolutely. But to make it work, we must get all different shades. What often happens amongst our people is this judgment that we saw. Are you pure enough? Are you, so we are constantly finding reason for pointing at micro differences. Are you radical enough? Whereas on the minimum platform of asserting who we are, we can find the things we agree on. And this is, if you remember Malcolm X in his reference to bullets and ballots. And he was addressing this question of him being Muslim and Martin Luther King being Christian. And he was saying, well, all this really is not the most important thing. The most important thing is how do we become, by leveraging our collective struggle, a force that cannot be ignored. And I think that is the question, the same question that Blyden, the same question Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, the same question CLR James Garvey faced, which is how do we create self-reliant growth? How do we create unity of purpose? How do we create these islands of success that are then linked? How do we create our own story? Or as Robert Nesta Marley, Bob Marley once said, how do we emancipate ourselves from the mental slavery which is divide and rule enforced on us by so many. So you'll say Africans and African Americans, oh, we're different. Why? Because we give anecdotes of why we're different, right? You tell Caribbeans that we're not really Africans, we're not Afro-descendants, or you tell. Those differences really, at the end of the day, don't matter, because whether you are from the Caribbean or from Brazil, whether you speak Portuguese, Spanish, English, or French, when you appear bearing the skin color and texture and hair that you do, white supremacy will react the same to you. And global development treat you the same. You are the dumping ground of all waste. You are the ones suffering the most from climate change. You are the ones who are facing the sort of mining and extraction in your neighborhoods that's unsustainable. You're the one whose children, whose sons and daughters are overrepresented in prisons. You are the ones who live in the poorest neighborhoods. So my view is unite or perish, publish or perish. Tell your own story, or they'll tell your story and distort it for you. So first, let's deal with a few facts. Ethiopia has 110, 120 million people. Nigeria has 200 million people. The rest of the continent, 1.3 billion people. Africa, the continent, has more billionaires. The largest group of billionaires, Black billionaires, are from Africa, right? If you add the entire Africa without making these false colonial demarcations between sub-Saharan and North Africa, actually the numbers are much higher. Here is the difference. We have actually never adjusted mentally, all of us, to understanding that the wealthiest Black man in the UK is an African, a Zimbabwean called Strive Masiwa, right? The wealthiest Black woman in the United Kingdom is an African.
Yes.
This is raising a fundamental question because historically you had brothers and sisters who were coming from North America were wealthier than their counterparts in Latin America and the Caribbean and in Africa. That has changed over the last 15 years or so. But if you look at what you want to call the middle class, so in essence, part of what white supremacy and colonialism achieved, Black or African migrants who've come into the United States and into the United Kingdom and France have done much better than local Black populations. Now, I always like to draw a parallel. When the South African apartheid regime could not deal with the insurrection of local Black South Africans, it went into the neighboring countries to look for Black labor to supplant the more unionized and radicalized local Black labor in South Africa. This idea that you play off the migrants against the local population and the distinctions, then used only the Black migrants as to show that the system is not that bad. The problem is that others work harder than others. It is actually disingenuous. Our people must demystify, must look beyond, and must question. Historically, too, we perpetuated certain myths that action. So when we're talking about Pan-Africanism, we always reference the 1919 conference. And I keep telling people that between Azikiwe, 1919, and the ANC conference in 1912, there was no telefax that was sent to the ANC from folk meeting in Philadelphia. If you read, it's on Google, if you read the resolution of the founding conference of the African National Congress in South Africa, it called for unity of all Africans. So the concurrency of the evolution of global Pan-African consciousness, and even using the terms and the ethos, because we will end up with this point, because before we say, oh, it started here, but this is part of convenient historiography. So I always tell my colleagues that the best way to understand is that we were tainted. And as you know, some people within the, prominent people within the historical Pan-Africanist movement believe that the African Americans who are coming to Africa were coming to civilize Africa.
That's right.
Right? That proximity to whiteness had vested in them a superiority that would enable them to take the continent out of the dark ages, because you had imbibed this notion that your own people who created geometry, your own people who built the illustrious pyramids in Egypt and the ruins in Zimbabwe and many other impressive architectural pieces actually had no form of science.
That's right.
So you were returning now from a white world with science. Now, we know that this was intended as colonial erasure. It was intended for men, and that we may have imbibed it because we didn't have the sort of access to information we now have. The first thing we must resolve is ensuring that Black migrants in Europe and in America and local Black populations and brown populations don't create the false divide that creates exceptionalism and therefore disunity and fight. The struggles are the same.
That's right.
And those struggles are the same. So I would suggest that when this comes to funding, there is a consciousness on the continent. You have Trust Africa sitting in Dakar, working across, and you have others who have been working on African philanthropy, African-run funding platforms and mechanisms. African billionaires and others have, till now, confined themselves to social development, education, etc., partly because the political systems under which they operate are very restrictive and frown upon funding of broader social justice by the system. I think, let me wind up. So my own sense is we have models. We have to decolonize historical relations. We have to decolonize historical approaches to empowerment. We have to create secular ways of doing that knowledge. And I think that all of us have to, Africans have to function from a perspective where you don't embrace this inferiority that says anything from elsewhere, from Europe and from America is the best solutions.
That's right.
And equally so, colleagues coming from the US and Europe don't necessarily always believe that going to the continent means that you're going to civilize, to upgrade, to empower. I think our empowerment ecosystem must embody the reciprocal learning, mutuality in everything we do.
As my brother, Louis, the ICJ ambassador from Rwanda, has said, we could listen to Brian just kind of for days on end. I am incredibly grateful to these prolific and brilliant speakers for what they have deposited into our spirits. I'm going to ask that we gather them back as quickly as we can. And Brian Knight, who is there in the United Kingdom, Dorcas Chebet, Professor Dr. Dorcas Chebet, who is in Kenya, and our ICJ team in Goma, DRC, if we can bring them in. I'd love to give Brian an opportunity to just give a reflection or ask a question of any of the speakers. Please, the wonderful journalist, Brian Knight.
Thank you. The question that I wanted to ask is, obviously, we've spoken a lot about the importance of media, the importance of getting these ideas out to people and mobilizing people. But how do you engage in these kind of discussions in a way that is really gonna engage with people at the grassroots and isn't gonna almost push them away from these ideas of liberation and internationalism? Because I feel sometimes whenever these discussions are had, it can fall into that academic place, and it really does alienate people from engaging with them.
Which one of you would like to kind of jump at that? I see heads nodding. Dr. Blyden.
I'll say something. I mean, I think you're right. And I mean, those of us, of course, who are scholars sometimes can't help it, and so we try our best. And I mean, I hope that you didn't feel that we were too academic here today. I know I certainly am always attuned to my audiences, but it's a fair criticism, and I think we as scholars have to do better as we talk about these issues out of the academy to take it beyond just theory. So, I mean, do I have a prescription? You know, I don't know, but yeah.
Does anyone else have want to respond to that before we bring in Dr. Trevette? Brent, Dr. Byrd, are you, I feel you're kind of, you're on mute.
Unfortunately, my AirPods died in the middle of the question, so I actually didn't catch all of it.
Essentially, the question was making sure that this is not just a conversation among those in the academy, but figuring out a way for it to really kind of live out in the real world so that we don't lose our audience. And that's kind of what ICJ is all about, really kind of creating a populist Pan-African movement. But Dr. Byrd, let me let you respond to that question, and then we'll bring in Dr. Jabet. Thank you, Brian.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that absolutely makes perfect sense. But I would humbly suggest being, I appreciate Bishop Tolton, you bringing me into the work that ICJ is doing, but it doesn't strike me that ICJ is at risk of doing that. While I appreciate being brought into this, coming from the academy, to, give a couple thoughts. Obviously this is a forum, in which, we just heard from, Professor Howe, breaking down what the work has actually looked like, right? So we weren't permitted to delve into abstract theory and just sort of proselytizing or whatnot. That I feel like this is a conversation that has really, and even to the comments that we just heard from Brian, that's really been grounded in, okay, what has the work look like? What can it look like? What does an effective political education consist of? Yes, so it's a very real concern, but it strikes me that this is a space in which sort of bottom up and grassroots practice has been very much at the center of our conversation here.
Thank you so much for that reflection. Dr. Dorcas Jabet from Kenya, please, your reflection and question for our panelists before we give each of them an opportunity to just give a quick closing thought. Dr. Jabet.
Thank you very much, Bishop Joseph Tolton. I will ask a question and give a very small reflection that I prepared specifically for this day. And this is my question. Oppression is connected. And one of the key issues that is being used in the contemporary society to render the powerless vulnerable is human sexuality. So as we speak about interconnected justice, and as we decentralize the quest for justice from people of African descent in America down to Kilifi where I am, what are some of the modalities we can use to redeem, to reconstruct the image of people of African descent in ways that their sexuality is not used to render them vulnerable to oppression and present them as passive recipients of injustices? As you wait to answer that question, allow me to read a very small script that I prepared for today. This is Black Internationalism Day, 24th February 2022. It marks the struggles that Africans and people of African descent have gone through and continue to experience in the quest for protection of groups in institutions of vulnerability. The guiding question is, must we still remind people that Black lives matter? Yet we are all created in the image and likeness of God, as indicated in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. All oppression is connected, and the fight for a just society needs interconnectedness too. People of African descent and Africans in general have continued to suffer one form of injustice or the other, regardless of space and time. Oppression is very personal. It is unique to every individual and also life-altering. Oppression impacts each one of us in different ways, depending on our response and reaction to it. The most unfortunate scenario is when oppression targets the identity of a person, but in particular, sexual identity. Human sexuality is the crown of God's creation and a gift from God. Yet, it is one of the most powerful weapons that many oppressors use to attack the dignity of the minority of God's people and render many to positions of vulnerability and powerlessness. As we celebrate Black Internationalism Day, it is good to look back with gratitude, look at where we are critically, and look forward prophetically. As an Old Testament scholar, how do I look back with gratitude? I look back with gratitude by analyzing how my fellow people of African descent have exposed ways in which biblical texts have been used to justify oppression and discrimination, yet at the same time, I celebrate ways in which my fellow people of African descent have identified with the liberating stories in the Bible to write in order to write their stories. I look at where I am critically in ways that allows me to name, expose, criticize, destabilize, and deconstruct systemic injustices that continue to relegate people of African descent in spheres of vulnerability, rendering them passive recipients of injustices. This way, it is possible to deconstruct societal structures that continue to nurture ideologies of oppression while at the same time normalizing discrimination. I will also look forward prophetically with hope through naming the histories and historical victories of the sheroes and heroes in ways that enable all to see hope in the midst of despair. God is a God of justice who calls upon all of us not to watch from a distance. Thus, we need to connect in order to build forward with confidence. In the Song of Songs, one encounters the voice of a woman who has suffered racial discrimination, socioeconomic injustices, sexual abuse, and identity crisis as a result of being looked down upon. Yet, she confronts her fears and builds forward with confidence in such a way that those who are looking down upon her declare her the fairest amongst women. Thus, shall we wait and watch from a distance? Even though we are not supposed to remind them that Black lives matter, it is not a crime to do so either. If I rise, we rise. Let us build forward with confidence. Thank you.
Blessings, 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 and thank you. I'm going to ask each of you to just give a 30-second conclusive remark. Professor Almeida, will start with you because I know what your schedule is like, and I want to include the question that she had. How is it that we can reconstruct our sense of self around our sense of sexual identity and physical presentation as people of African descent, a critical component of our liberation struggle that does not get the airtime that it deserves? Professor Almeida, I'll start with you.
Okay, thank you so much. The question is very important. For this reason, I insisted to say that the racial issue is not only a racial issue. The racial issue is not only a local or regional issue. It's a global issue. And the concept of race is a complex concept. We have to understand the system of racialization in each country and how the system functions in all over the world. The process of racialization is a process that involves class, gender, sexuality. The struggle against oppression is a struggle against exploitation too. There is no possible to separate oppression and exploitation. Exploitation is not a moral concept. It's a concept that's linked with economy, the economic model, the neoliberal form to understand the process of reproduction of social and economic conditions. So a Black International Day is a day to reflect and to to make strategies to struggle against all forms of oppression and exploitation, to think how it's possible to construct a new world in terms of economy,
yes,
politics, and to project a new imaginary. It's very important to think about a future, to think about future, how to construct a new future is possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. His Excellency Paul Kagame of Rwanda always talks about the fact that the biggest problem among Africans is a crisis of imagination. Dr. Blyden.
Okay, so thank you, Ms. Chabe, very much, because I think what you were speaking to were these on-the-ground issues that we shouldn't forget, and Dr. Almeida spoke of that in his talk with respect to what's been going on in Brazil. And there have been criticisms, as there should be, right, historically, of the Black liberation struggle as far as its exclusions, right? The way in which there were moments when women were excluded, non-elites, people from different classes were excluded, and perhaps now we're seeing exclusions, or at least a sense of exclusions of people who identify themselves differently in terms of sexuality. So I think even as we talk about interconnections, we should also remember the differences, right? And the fact that, you know, some parts of the Black world are more privileged than others. So we should recognize, I think, right, even as we're trying to talk about these ideas of unity and interconnections, to not forget that different spaces face different challenges, whether we're talking about sexuality or other things, right? So that's, I think, what I would like to leave with.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Leila, and then we'll finish with Dr. Byrd. Leila.
Sure. Really to echo what's been said, I think, already. So I grew up in a time when academics and academia, because of the strength of the international Black movement, really wanted to support that movement. And I think, as Dr. Blyden has just said, we're not in that space now. There is a whole section of academics and academia who really do not see any relation to the fight for justice and for liberation, who are in the kind of academic bubble of discussing amongst themselves Black issues, but aren't really connected to what's going on in the ground. And I think that goes back to Brian's point of, we have these really talented intellectuals and academics. Here today, we've seen those who are really very keen to progress the agenda of Black internationalism, but that isn't the case throughout academia. And I think we need to kind of have a time when we return to some discussion about what is the role of academics and academia and people involved in institutions of learning, given the precarious state the world is in at the moment. I mean, I say to everybody, the world appears to be going to hell in a handbasket, and there's just no leadership anywhere which really comes up with a kind of moral answer. This discussion today is one of the first steps I've seen to people who really genuinely want to address that question. So for that, I'm really grateful. But lots of questions more than there are answers at the moment, I think.
Oh, thank you so kindly, Leila. Leila, Dr. Byrd.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in agreement with everything, and to that critical last intervention, right? What is history without politics? Then it's antiquarianism. It's some hobbyist pursuit. It's devoid of meaning. It's certainly not connected to, the broader struggle. But I think that Bishop Tolton, to your immediate question that you asked us to reflect on, I think it was Ruth Wilson Gilmore, the abolitionist, great activist, said, where does any sort of activist project come out of? In a very simplistic sense, it oftentimes comes from describing conditions as they are, right? And then what politics, what are the needs that come out of that, right? So I look, and then this is taking it to a local level, right? Look at a state like Texas in the United States right now, right? How is the attempt to quite literally craft legislation to take trans children away from their parents, right? Connected to attempts to create an educational system crafted around a US white exceptionalism, devoid of any discussion of racism or classism or sexism, right? You know, so the basic description is that these things are happening at the same time, right? So the question, why, right? You know, it's a project of domination and exploitation and white supremacy as is bound up with patriarchy. So then to the need to the politics and how it fits in our discussion today, right? As, you know, if we are interested in a Pan-Africanist, you know, a Black internationalist politics, right? Then we can see how that's happening at local level, but it's connected to similar projects, you know, other locations throughout the world, right? Where, you know, the projects of a white supremacist government go hand in hand with patriarchy, go hand in hand with economic exploitation, right? So to then not fight fight on those grounds, I think to a point that's been made here, it's going to be a losing proposition then, right? That the only way to combat these things, right, is to forge, you know, struggle across boundaries and also to forge it in a way that clearly connects these seemingly disparate interests or disparate struggles, right?
Blessings to you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You panelists are absolutely spectacular. You are absolutely brilliant. I am deeply humbled that you have come into this space with Interconnected Justice. I think that one of the thoughts that I will take with me from today is that we are at a fork in the road and we can either go global or we can perish. And I think that we've made a decision here today that we are not going to perish. We have a vision to go global and to really live out this idea of being one people, not just intellectually, although we have to have those intellectual conversations. They're necessary, but importantly, they have to translate into action that changes our lived reality. And I believe that we as a people are absolutely ready to do that. The strategic intent of Black Internationalism Day is to connect the 1.28 billion people of African descent globally in a project of reimagining our self-identity and the African footprint to include Africa in its full connection to the diaspora. You all have been a magnificent audience. You've stayed for 15 minutes overtime, and I'm deeply grateful for how engaged and committed your presence suggests you are to the project of creating and establishing Black Internationalism Day. Each one of you will hear from us very soon. We see this as a year-long project to advocate that the Congressional Black Caucus declare a resolution establishing Du Bois's birthday, or the last Thursday in February, as Black Internationalism Day. So please know that this convening is the launch of an ongoing campaign, and we hope to bring you back tangible results. I'm going to ask that Timani would come very quickly. He's one of the artists that's a part of the ICJ Music Beat, and he's going to talk about very quickly his video, and then we're going to end by opening up our cameras from all over the world and loving on each other, as Bell Hooks taught us that we must do as Black people, and that will send us home. Thank you, thank you, thank you for your participation. Timani, are you still here? Lamont, if Timani is not still here, we can go to a regular view so that all of the chiclets and
everyone.
Is he here?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Lamont, you can spotlight him if you can find him. Go for it, Timani.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening around the world. My name is Timani. I am Nigerian, originally African, and I'm based in New York City as an ambassador for Africa and for the Black community. I'm a musician and a human rights activist, and I'm a part of the ICJ project. I just want to say I'm humbled to be here, and I'm humbled to be a part of a platform like this where we can speak about unity in diversity, where we can express ourselves and look for the way forward, which is more important. I would really like to speak briefly about a project that I'm a big part of. It's called Africa Everything. It was founded by one of my colleagues that's also here. Her name is Aisha. And what we do is we in the diaspora that are Africans, we find a way to solve the problem in our own way, because we believe that we don't have to wait for powers that be to give us validation before we can solve problems. So we don't have to be part of the government. We don't have to be part of politics. All we do is we source for funds, we source for donations and support. And we go back to Africa. We focus on a particular country and a small community, figure out what's going on there and what they need. If it's water they need, we find a way to fix it. If it's good education, we find a way to fix it. If the classrooms are not comfortable, we find a way to fix it. We've done Senegal, we've done Nigeria. This year we focused on Ghana. Last year we focused on Ghana. So we raised, in our own small way, we raised between $10,000 to $15,000. And so far we have been sending the money, and there's so much evidence. It's online, it's on social media. Check Africa Everything, AE. We are developing schools there, giving the students a better education. And we plan to not just leave them in that level, we're going to follow them up onto university level. So we're going to take care of them from the grades, the high school, up onto university. So that's what Africa Everything is about. So I actually supposed to speak about my music, but I mean, my name is T-Manny. I don't think I really have to stress on that. So you could search me out, search my music. But what's most important right now is Black unity and African unity. Thank you.
Awesome. We love you, brother T-Manny. All right, Lamont, let's go to a regular view. I encourage you to, you can unmute yourselves and unspotlight me and turn on your cameras and just pour love on each other from wherever you are in the world, and enjoy this ICJ music beat featuring T-Manny and Aaliyah and Bello from Haiti, who you saw at the top of the event. One people. Please open up your cameras, turn off, come off mute, and just love each other.
Hey, from Kenya.
Greetings.
Great to see all of you. Love you, Bahia. Love you, brother.
Thank you so much for playing.
Welcome, Saida.
Can you show all these beautiful people to Facebook?
Haiti's in the house. ICJ, GRC, Rwanda. Turn on your camera, guys. If you want to see us.
Hello.
Hello, everybody.
Dr. Mark Terry. My mom, Father Thompson, my cousin. Thank you. Love you.
Wonderful.
So good for us to be together. Brazil, Haiti, USA, Rwanda, Uganda, Congo, Kenya. We are all Africans. We are one people.
Rwanda.
So good for us to all be together. Dr. Yab. So good to see you. So good to see you. Roundball, thank you for being here. ICJ DRC. Thank you, Prosper.
I just admitted the Mahmoud, but I
am so glad to see you. ICJ Rwanda.
Hi, Dad.
Hi, Gael. That's my daughter.
Hi, Dad. How are you?
Peace and love from Brazil, Bahia. Everybody be safe.
Bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you, China. ICJ Rwanda, come on, let me see you. Turn on the camera there, Joffrey.
Beautiful gathering.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you guys for hanging in there. Thank you for the half hours of love. We honor the ancestors that are with us today. We honor the ancestors that are with us today. Dr. Garvey, Amy Garvey, they're here with us today. They're here with us today. They are here with us. Thank you, Danny. You did great work today.
Anytime, Dad.
Maxim Rathon, it was good to see you today. To our interpreter, thank you.
Thank you so much, Bishop.
You did great work today, brother. You did great work today. Excellent execution.
Bye.
Dr. Emmanuel and Goma, I'm glad to see you. There's Nishimama Jean-Claude from Rwanda. There's my son.
I'm so happy to see you.
So glad to see you. Eric Nishimana from Rwanda. Great to
Thank
see
you so much. It was so amazing.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you, Marcos Presende. I appreciate you all. Great showing.
Yeah, man.
Thank you for the board chair.
Locassine chérie.
Thank you everyone for coming. Everything from the Gaga.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you, Hazel. Dr. Cheryl Dudley, one of our board members. Thank you for being here.
Bless you.
Mom, we're glad you're here. If you weren't here, I wouldn't be here. So thank you for being here. All right.
Thank you, Mother Tolton. We love you.
Absolutely.
We love you. Thank you for giving birth to Bishop.
Amen. Amen. Awesome. All right. You guys hang out, stay as long as you want, love on each other for as long as you want. Again, to our speakers, you were awesome. So glad to have all of you. There you go, Eric Dushimana in Rwanda. We're glad to see you. Thank you all for being there. All right. Love on each other.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bless
Leila.
you.
Thank you
Bless
so
you all.
much. Awesome work today.
Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Kwaheri.
Max, bye.
Kwaheri.
Kwaheri.
Asante.
Have a good one.
Can we stop the interpretation? So we can, I don't think that she's there.
Who?
Mrs. Françoise. Bishop, you are on mute. Oh, she's there.
Who's there?
Yeah, she's there.
She's not there. Thank you so much, Dr. Perry. Appreciate you, brother.
She's there. I see Françoise.
Oh, Mrs.
Francois.
Tolton is here.
Yes. It's actually Thompson. Thompson is her name, but that's what Tolton is our family name.
Okay.
Bishop, can you make me host again?
Oh, I thought you, how did
I
you?
did. I switched it.
Okay. You're the host. Oh, I can stop recording now.
I did.